So first off, I want to say about performing your best that performing is a skill just like any other, you know. And I think that a lot of times we tend to think that people are just sort of good under pressure or not good under pressure, that they're good at performing or not. And I think that really, while some of us might sort of have a greater aptitude naturally than others, like they would at anything, that is definitely a skill that can be improved, and that to do so requires both deliberate practice and exposure to performance experiences. And also, I want to say that when I talk about performing, a lot of what I'm going to talk about is, of course, for skydiving and especially for competitions. But I really think this applies, I mean, for sure, not just for competitions, but sort of, or not just skydiving, but almost kind of anything in which you have to perform. But then within skydiving, even I think a lot of this holds true for people doing AFF jumps, you know, or people who are getting a coach rating or whatever. And people, I've kind of done versions of this seminar before, and people who have been at varying levels, not just people who are trying to use this type of skills for performance at, let's say, a nationals competition, have come back to me and told me, you know, like, I thought about what you said in preparation for my AFF level 4, and it helped me, you know, and that's really cool. It really makes me feel good. And also, I think it kind of goes to the point that these performance skills are applicable across a wide range of skydiving, and then, of course, outside of skydiving too. So deliberate practice includes things like doing a draw for score. So what do I mean by that? I mean doing like a practice set of dives, but doing them as where you're really you're scoring it and you want to get the highest score you can, rather than trying to work on improving a specific technique. Visualizing being at a big competition, selecting dives from past competitions. These are all things that you can do in practice to improve performance experience. And then the performance experience themselves, it can include local skydiving meets, national competitions, of course, tunnel competitions, and international meets. And about that, I kind of want to particularly highlight the last two, that I think a lot of people don't know, that tunnel competitions happen all over the country, some smaller, some bigger, and they're a great opportunity to practice being in competition. And then a lot of international meets are available to people at varying levels, and they can be a ton of fun too. I think of a couple as the Bedford Wind Tunnel meet and Windor in Spain are two that you don't really need to qualify to go. And there's a lot of varied levels, especially I would say, especially the Bedford indoor meet. And so you will find people to compete with no matter where your skill level, even quite beginner teams. And then World Cups. Rarely does a World Cup is full of teams who want to attend those World Cups. So of course, I get it. If you're a newer team, it can be expensive to travel and take a lot of time. But man, you know, being able to go to, say, Germany or Norway or wherever and participate in an international competition, really just because you applied, it's awesome. It's fun. It's really cool. And, you know, it's likely that if you want to go to one, you probably can, because there are several spots available, and rarely are all those spots full. Both deliberate practice and performance experiences should be a part of your season plan. So deliberate practice is necessary to make the successful transition from practice to performance. You know, so basically what I'm getting at there is you can't just expect to practice to be focused in a learning and improving mindset, and then go right from there to a competition and expect to do your best at competition. And I'll talk about how that changes, because when you're doing a competition, you're not trying to get better, you're trying to do you at your best at that moment. And so if you don't practice that mindset in practice, then you won't do your best at that when it comes to the actual performance of a competition. It can be sprinkled in throughout the year. It can be included with little extra cost or time. And so those are all good things. And then, of course, note, it can be a challenge to make practice feel real. So when I'm trying to deliberately practice sort of performance experiences, and what I mean by that is sort of, putting yourself in the mindset as if you're in a competition, but in practice, that can be difficult to feel that it's real, but the better we get at that, the better we prepare ourselves for the real thing. And then the actual performance experiences, there's no substitute for the real competition. You learn the most about how you perform when you're actually doing it in a real competition. The best way to be prepared for different types of experiences is by having those different types of experiences in the past. So my point there is that sometimes in a competition, you might be way behind and be trying to catch up. Other times you might be ahead and be trying to stay ahead. Other times you might be in a dead heat and trying to, keep performing at your peak. Sometimes you'll have a bad round and you'll have to come back from that. Sometimes you have a really good round and that will, make you too relaxed. And so being in lots of different competition experiences is really the only way you can see all of those different things and be ready for the next time that happens so that you can perform even better next time. Competitions are also very powerful motivators for continued commitment to improvement. I know every time I'm done with a meet, that's when I'm like my most psyched to like, I can't wait to train again. And when's the next time that we're going to jump? And man, I know exactly what I did wrong. And I know I could do this thing better. And I just want to jump, or fly, whatever it is. So competitions are just a tremendous way to stay motivated. If all we do is practice, it can get kind of dull over time. And so I think competitions are a great way to break that monotony. And then, of course, performance experiences can add significant cost and time to your training plan versus practicing performance. If you go to a meet, you have to travel there. There's probably additional travel costs. There's competition costs. It takes more time to do fewer jumps, let's say, than you would have in a training day. And all that's true, but I'll say that because of the stuff above that, because of the fact that there's really no substitute for competition, I think it's so important that teams or individuals get as much real performance experience as they can. Practicing performance skills, analysis versus execution. So what I like to think about is when we are performing, or anytime we do a jump, let's say, or any activity that we're trying to get better at, especially sports, we have a certain amount of analysis where we're learning, we're thinking about the details, we're evaluating, we're technical, we're trying to improve. That's what I call sort of the y-axis here, or the analysis. And then on the x, I've got this execution, so the just do itness, the no thinking, the flow, the the attitude, the intensity. These are things that we're not so much focused on learning, we're focused on performing. So on the upper left, I've got learning. On the bottom right, I've got executing and doing and performing. And it's important to recognize that, you see the other two squares I've got grayed out. We can't do neither learning nor sort of just doing, or I say that you kind of have to be brain dead to be able to pull that off, as far as I know. That's the bottom left. On the top right, it's very hard, and I say sort of not possible to be maximally in a flow mindset, no thinking, intensity, just do it, and at the same time evaluating and learning, right? We can't do both at the same time. And so we want to be very deliberate about understanding when are we focused on learning and analysis, and when are we focused on execution and performance. And that is going to vary throughout our training cycle, which is to say, if I think about a training camp, let's say like a training weekend, and maybe for many teams let's say you train once a month for the purpose of this example, then there's sort of the time leading up to it, and then there's the weekend of. That's what I would call a training cycle, and that sort of repeats, let's say monthly, or the entire training season in the longer term. There's places for analysis and learning and evaluating, and there's places for execution and no thinking and performance. And because we can't really do both at the same time, I think we want to really define throughout our training cycle and throughout our training season what the focus of our specific, moment in our training is. And what I found is that for many of us, we tend towards one of these, and that's what we do most of the time. And it's very hard for us to get out of that mindset. So many of us are, either very much drawn towards a learning, evaluating, analytical mindset, and we're kind of doing that all the time, or we're very much drawn to an executing, no thinking, sort of performance, just go out and do it mindset. And then we're not as inclined to be sort of doing the analysis. Analysis and the learning is great because it's where we kind of improve for sure, right? But it can have its risks, because if we're always doing that, then it can stunt us from feeling that flow and for performing our best when it's time to do that. That's where sort of brain locks can occur, mechanicalness can happen. Being really heavy in execution is great because we might do our best for ourselves at any moment, and I think that's the way we want to be in a performance. But if we never analyze and learn in our season, then of course we're missing out on opportunities to improve, right? So we want to do both, and we want to just make sure we're deliberate about when it's the right time to do each and hold ourselves accountable to each, and perhaps recognize where you lie in your tendencies and kind of, adjust for that, So for me, I'm very analytical, and I know that especially in my preparatory sort of visualization, I need to really break that tendency and devote a certain amount of my visualization to the execution and performance mindset. And I'll talk more about that in a moment. So analysis versus execution within a training cycle. As I said, I'm calling a cycle, let's say, for example, a plan in which we train monthly, 1 week in a month. I'm calling the cycle from sort of the let's say the three weeks out or 4 weeks out, planning for the weekend, and up to the weekend, and then during that weekend, and then we're done, and then we would repeat that cycle. So if we kind of take that same picture of analysis versus execution, and now I've sort of drawn a line of time, and I'm saying that over time, as we approach the moment of being in the door in our training cycle, we're going to go from more of a learning analytical mindset to more of a execution mindset, right? And I'll go into more detail about how we do that. So analysis versus execution within the training cycle. So the week before, and I might even say weeks before, the details I might think about. Now I'm thinking about, okay, I'm at home, maybe I'm at work, maybe I'm on the subway on my way to work, and I'm putting in some time. Generally, this is visualization of training. I'm going to be thinking about technique. I'm going to be thinking about maybe mechanics if I need to, and I'm going to be thinking about specific maneuvers, right? That's the detail I might incorporate into my visualization. I'm doing block 21, the zigzag marquee, and I'm imagining myself stepping out and stopping hard. Maybe I'm even imagining myself digging this knee in. I'm imagining myself looking, up until the moment that I've decided is, how long I should look. All that, that's the specific detail that I'm working on that I can visualize in my off time in the week or weeks before. But the execution would be, imagine I had a dive, let's say with the zigzag marquee, right? I would say, okay, I've thought about this block, I've thought about this block, I've thought about this block. Now what I want to do is I want to put it in a real dive and imagine myself flying that dive from exit to break off, and doing that without overly focusing on the mechanics. And can I trust that in my head, I can visualize myself doing it, and that I'm doing the things that I practiced, doing the detailed things I practiced without having to talk myself through all of that detail, you know? And I think that's a really important thing. For me, in my off time, it's so easy for me I can spend a half hour just thinking about that step out on block 21, you know? And it's boom, boom, and all I'm doing is that step out. And I never put it back into a dive and visualize the dive. And I think it's so important to do that, because it's when you do that that you see if you feel like you've really absorbed the technique into sort of the performance, you know? So that's what I'm trying to break out the detail and the execution. And what I would say is, because we often can be much more heavy on the technical in our visualization in our off time, at least for those of us who tend towards being technical, I would say make at least 20% of that time still just execution. And so what I'm saying is just visualizing, not the strict technique, but the thing you were working on in your head, putting it into dive and imagining it. So the example would be, my detail is block 21. All I'm thinking about is the move. Then I'm going to make up a dive with block 21. Maybe it's sort of like EM 21. And now I'm going to visualize a whole dive with EM 21 and allow myself to go through it for a full dive's time. So at least 35 seconds without the talk through of, oh, put my knee here, look there, that kind of thing. Okay, that's my visualization the week before. Heavy on technique and mechanics and specifics, but always making sure to pepper in execution. The night before. By the night before, I assume you probably have your plan. Maybe you've got the specific jumps you're going to work on that weekend, or at least the day before. And so the detail, I think, is going to be a little bit less. I think, you know, you might think about, when you're visualizing, maybe one thing on the exit you want to improve for a given dive, maybe 1 to 2 things on the jump you want to work on. And visualize those 1 to 2 things on the jump, visualize that one thing on the exit, and maybe you're indoor practicing it, maybe you're on the flat practicing the move, but then again, the execution part, make sure we don't forget that. Go back into your head of, I'm going to do the dive all the way through for 35 seconds without all that self-talk about the little details of the technique. And here I'm saying, okay, you know, let's make sure at least 40% of your visualization time, your mental prep time, is more on the execution side versus on the focus of the detail side. And of course, these numbers are round, you know, it's just meant to give you a relative sense of, as we're getting closer and closer to getting into the sky, we're progressing from heavy on analysis to heavy on execution. And you can see the drawing on the left indicating that. So now we're the day of, right? And we're walking, we're creeping, we're at the mock-up, preparing the dives during the day. I'd say now, I think again, you know, focusing on, in the learning standpoint, the analysis standpoint, really maybe one thing on the exit. Anything more than that is going to be too much. And 1 to 2 things in the jump as well. And when you're doing your walk, that's the most that I think you want to have in your head. When you're doing your creep, same thing. And when you're at the mock-up, for sure, the same thing. At most, 1 thing on the exit, 1 to 2 things on the jump that you want to be technically thinking about, analytically thinking about. And then, as always, ending with execution. So the last part of your walk, you should be able to walk all the way through, where we're not talking about the details of a specific move, but getting into the flow of the whole dive. And so I encourage that with the team. If it takes a bunch of walks to get there, fine, but we definitely don't want the last thing we do in our walk to be someone saying like, oh yeah, and don't forget to look at me longer, you know, and then you finished your walk. No, the last part of your walk should be you've gone through at least 35 seconds of walking without anyone making comments and where you felt like you were simply focusing on executing. And the same is true for creeping, and the same is true for mock-up. In the beginning of each of those steps, we can talk about a couple of things we want different, especially on the creepers, right? I might say, okay, we're creeping this, and then yes, I need you to give me more hip here. I need us to be a little closer here. But even in the creep, I want to always have a final creep in which all we do is roll through the moves without talking and without trying to make adjustments or fixing, but just performing the dive. That's day of prep. So you can see we're getting even more and more into execution. Next, we're in the plane. And I like to break up in the plane into sort of like 3 areas, from takeoff to say the handshake, from the handshake to the red light, and then red light to setting up in the door. At this point, I'm going to encourage you to be almost no detail, you know? And of course, this can vary some, for sure. If your intent in this jump is to do a drill dive, and the intent is, okay, all we're trying to do is make smaller step outs on block 21, well, fine. Then for you to be thinking a little bit about that small step out in your visualizations, fine. But I encourage you to see if you can visualize your dive and visualize yourself doing that small step out, but without having to talk yourself through it, you know? So this is something I think about a lot on throughout my visualizations, whether it's in the weeks before or all the way up into the plane, because I'm talking about this idea of visualizing just pure execution, I would like you to kind of do this exercise on your own. Pick a dive and visualize it for 35 seconds. Maybe start a watch and let it play for 35 seconds and see if you can get all the way through 35 seconds without telling yourself a single verbal coaching. You know, can you go a full 35 seconds of a dive you make up and not say at any point, oh, make sure to step out more, or make sure to dig your knee in, or whatever it is? Because, you know, what I found is that's hard to do. It's hard to go even 35 seconds without starting to give yourself cues. And if you do that if you do that in your actual jump, it's going to be a distraction. You know, what our ultimate goal is in the actual jump, for us to just be executing, to not be talking through coaching ourselves in the air. And so my point is, if you can't do that on the ground, it's going to be very hard for you to do that in the sky. So it's something that, like everything else, you practice. You can see that I say from takeoff to handshake, we're saying, okay, 80% is execution. Maybe you've got little things that one thing that you've said to yourself, but almost nothing. From the handshake to the red light, maybe you've got a tiny bit. And then the red light to set up door, we're totally trusting that I'm not giving myself any more technical cues. It's all about performance. So what am I doing? I'm thinking about the dive all the way through. I'm giving myself keywords to tune arousal level. So what do I mean by that? I'm saying to myself things like, maybe like, like kill it. You got this. You're awesome. Be strong. Be fast. Whatever words work for you, but these are words meant to cue emotional feelings and getting your, what we say, arousal level, your energy level, your mental level at the appropriate level for your best performance. And that's something you'll also learn to fine tune and to get better at. In other words, some people tend to be overamped and they might need to have keywords like calm, easy, cool, right? To lower that arousal level to their peak level. Other people might be under excited, and therefore need to raise their arousal level and say, get pumped, you can do this, whatever. But it's not the same for everybody, but you'll learn what you need through practice to get to that optimal level. And especially as we approach the setting up in the door, if you're saying anything to yourself, it's those kind of things that I want you saying to yourself, and then just visualizing the dive. Also, I'll say that in this time, I go from visualizing the whole dive for like full, say 35 seconds, and then I take a break, and then I visualize the whole dive again. When I get to the end, the red light set up in the door, I start to actually visualize even like a little bit less of the dive. Like I might visualize actually the setup and maybe the first page and then the first point of the next page. And maybe that's all I'm doing. And then I'm putting myself back in the door and doing that again. So not going through tons and tons and tons of reps in my head. I'm just prepping the moments that are gonna get me out the door. And then I'm sort of trusting from then on, you know, and trust is sort of a big, I say, concept for me of being able to execute at your best. Other things, I talk about smiling and drawing confidence from your teammates. You know, in this time, especially sort of red light to the door, or especially after the handshake, looking at your teammates and giving them a smile and positive energy with your body language and seeing that from them, I think is really, really helpful for our best performance and practicing our best performance. And, you know, I tell you, like, I'm not a fan of the, like, don't mess up or the, you know, you suck or anything like that. I think, you know, nothing but positivity is what makes us our most ready to perform at our best. And I encourage that to be what you sort of give to others, both verbally and in your body language, and what you look for in others. And I tell you, you know, I find my teammates or other people on the plane from whom I get that good energy, and it helps build me up. And if I look at if I'm scanning the plane and I look at someone who doesn't demonstrate that to me, then I stop looking at them. You know, I don't have time for someone who looks down or not positive. Yeah, so next, in the sky. Of course, in the sky, it's all execution. I have the little caveat, of course, if the goal of the sky is to drill a specific move, then it's realistic for you to be thinking of that specific move. But that's it. And I would say avoid evaluating after. So we can't be thinking of only that move, and then let's say it's, again, it's a zigzag marquee, it's this block 21, and then I have a few randoms. We can't spend the whole dive only thinking about that move. I'm going to do my best when it's time to do that move. And then it's sort of a palette cleanse of random, and then do my best to do that move, random. And I'm not going to be too stuck in the past. Just, okay, next time I'm going to, if my goal was to be closer, next time I'm going to be closer. That's it. Not, oh, why is this not close? Oh, what is someone else doing? Oh, that was close. Neither positive nor negative. It's just doing with that one intent that you said, you know, that you might have focused on if it is a drill dive, let's say. And then also, I think in the sky, it's really helpful to have keywords as well. So it's easy, all of us get distracted during a skydive. Even in the most important performances, I think we all have moments where these distractions can happen. Sometimes it's because things are going really well and you can't help but think about that. And sometimes it's because things aren't going so well and then you can't help but think about that. I have a key word, which is literally the word focus. And if I'm in the middle of my skydive and I find myself starting to drift towards or away from my focus, then I literally say to myself, focus, and I go back to saying the letters and the numbers in my head. And so it's a way that I can catch myself and get back into it before it's too late and I brain lock. So that's all analysis versus execution within the training cycle. Next, I'm going to talk about the analysis versus execution throughout the entire season, right? So I talked about it sort of if we had like a month-long, once a month camp, but what about our entire season? The same concepts apply from the beginning of the year to the end of the year as applied from 4 weeks out to the moment we're in the door of a jump. We start the season and we're much more heavy on analysis and learning. But by the time we get to the end of a season, let's call that nationals, we're much heavier on execution and GER. Yeah. So what does that mean in practice? The beginning of the season, my execution is going to be a little bit lower of practicing sort of performance. I'm gonna allow myself to focus on block drills, let's say, on random builds, on exit technique. However, I do want to devote some time to doing dives for score, for doing meets when they show up. You know, I think even early on, a meet can be a great way to do a benchmark, to benchmark your performance. So a little bit of all we're doing is trying to execute, for sure, the 10 to 20% range. But yeah, in the beginning, I'm going to be more heavy on drilling, learning, developing and understand a mutual understanding and the deepest understanding we can of our techniques. In the middle of the season, I'm going to start refining that technique. So hopefully we know what we've learned, what we were supposed to learn. We know the bulk of what we're trying to do, but maybe there's details that we can improve upon. And so now I've gone from the 10 to 20% execution to, depending on where we are in the middle of our season, upping execution all the way to 30 to 60%. So a little bit of refining technique, but now I'm starting to do, when I talk about execution more, I'm adding speed. I am adding in high level goals. So it's not make my step out small on the 21. It's like, generally, let's have small levels, you know, generally let's go faster, you know, generally let's keep closer between the formations. These are sort of higher level execution ideas versus the detailed, you know, spin this block in place technique. We're going to do more dives for score and more meets. And again, what I mean by dives for score is I'm going to do a dive. Ideally, it's maybe a dive from a historical draw competition from the past, and I know what other teams did, and I'm going to score it, and my only goal is to get the highest score I can. And then towards the end of the season, now we're like 90% execution. So we're going to avoid technique discussion largely. We're going to trust that wherever we are, that's where we are, and now we want to do that the best we can. We might have small polishes of technique, but we also want to be willing to let our weak areas be, you know? One thing that's important, I think, recognize is we always go into a competition with something not being where we want it to be. And if we allow ourselves to focus on that thing, it can be a real detriment to our best performance. And if instead we allow ourselves to forgive ourselves the things that we're not quite as good at, and to instead focus on our strengths, it allows us to do our very best performances, because we are positive, because we do our best things the best we can, and we don't let the things that aren't quite as good spill into the other things. So this is a very hard thing for, I think, a lot of skydivers to do. It's very hard for me to do. And I remember, I don't remember what year it was. I want to say it's maybe 2016 or so, 4 or 5 years ago. I remember in particular us having a lot of trouble with block 8 and spending so much time in like a couple weeks before nationals doing block 8, you know, and we got better at it, but we looked back at that decision towards the end of our season, and we realized that we made a mistake strategically, and that spending so much time on one thing to get that one thing better was not as good and not as helpful as if we continue to practice everything more generally and raise everything, the level of everything up, and be more positive, you know, and and make sure we don't lose the things we were good at. Because the other thing, it's easy to forget that just because I'm good at something doesn't mean I'll always be good at something. And practicing what you're good at is just as important as practicing what you're not as good at. So that's the detail at the end of the season. And then finally, execution, all high-level goals, attitude, keeping things small, make it happenness, you know, Practice, these are the high level ideas that you should be focusing on and thinking about in your jumps towards the end of the season, not, you know, again, how do I make my zigzag marquee smaller in the step out? Practice a full meet day. It's important at these points that you literally practice exactly as you would do the competition. You know, from show up to leave, you treat that day or whole weekend like it's the actual meet, complete with the entire process whatever you develop. Performance at the meet, or your next big way, or your next AFF jump. All these are the high level concepts that I think apply to everything. So now to kind of recap where we were and where we're going. So we talked about practicing and performance and execution on the scale of your training cycle. We talked about doing it across the season, and now I'm talking about performing at the actual competition itself. First, I say, okay, have a process and stick to that process. So much of what we're trying to do is overcome nerves, right? And when we have a process, when we know what to expect, that can be very comforting and allow us to be successful at overcoming our nerves. So what does that mean? Showing up. Who is your team leader? What other roles can you define? Check, like for instance, who's going to check the video after the jump? Is there a timekeeper keeping you on track for when it's time to start the prep? When it's time to walk? When it's time to go to the mock-up? When will you start to prep in the beginning of the day? Where will you set up camp? You know, these are all the little details that you want to practice even before you show up at the meet. Then there's the actual dive prep. So, okay, how do you walk? How do you creep? How do you mock up? What are the times that you do each of those things? By the time you get to your big competitions, you should know, for instance, okay, we walk it 3 times, and then the 4th time without talking or whatever. You know, we creep the angles twice, and then we creep 1 more time all the way through. Whatever it is, everybody knows those steps before we've come to the meet, and that's what we're doing at the meet. We're heavy on trust and low on feedback and requests. I think this is a really important idea. So while we're prepping and this is at the competition, I think it's really important that we start to say, again, we are as good as we're going to be right now. The best we can do is have sort of a positive attitude and confidence and trust. And so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the creepers asking my teammate to do something differently. I'm certainly not going to be reminding them of the things that I think they do wrong or that I want them to do better. I have to trust now at the meet that they either know those things, or if they don't, they don't. And that's it, you know. But I'm certainly not on the creepers saying, hey, you know, last time on block 21, you really stepped out too far. Remember to make it smaller. No, I'm going to trust that my teammate has that on his or her mind as well. And I'm just going to focus on myself. And this idea, I think, is really important because in the end, when it comes to our performance, the very best thing I can do is give full attention to making my performance the best it can be. And if I allow a focus on other people's performance to distract me from that, then I think I've missed out on the opportunity to be my best. And if I can trust that everybody is doing that, everybody's focusing on maximizing their best performance and not worrying about other people, then they will truly do their best. In the plane before and after, in the plane before and walking in after the dive, you should have a process both internally and externally, right? So internally, I'm saying your visualization, your self-talk, right, in the plane. And then externally, when do we have pin checks? When do we do handshakes, et cetera? When we've landed, when do we high five? Do we all walk in together? These are things that you would have practiced before, and now you're just sticking to that process after. And I say the importance of sticking that process because it's easy to be distracted. You've got sort of friends that maybe you haven't seen in a year. It might be in your own head about your own performance. And so it's easy for us to stray from our process, but staying from our process can add to stress for both us and for our teammates. So I think it's so important to avoid doing that. Okay, when nerves build, fall back on what's next in your process, right? So what does that mean? I'm in the plane and it's a big jump and I'm starting to think about, man, if, you know, because this talk happens. We can't avoid it from happening. It's what happens. How do we deal with it, right? So how do we deal with the negative talk of, man, I don't want to mess up. Man, what if I funnel this exit, right? What we do is we acknowledge it and we fall back on what is our process. Our process is, you know, positive keywords. Okay, you got this. You can do it. Our process is visualizing the dive. I put myself back in the door. And now I'm in my head, I'm back in the door, visualizing the skydive, and I've let that negative talk pass, right? So that's what I mean by nerves building, get back into your process. And the same thing in your ground, right? You're getting nervous, maybe you're looking at the score, and you say, okay, well, what's my process on the ground? Well, my process is, it's time to, you know, it's time for us to walk. Let's go over and we're gonna walk. That's what I'm gonna focus on. You know, my process is every 10 minutes I visualize the dive, let's say. Okay, that's what I'm going to do. My process is, you know, evaluating, you know, am I staying hydrated enough? And, okay, I'm going to go drink water. These little things can do so much to help when nerves build, sort of defray those nerves and get you back in step. Smiling at each other, saying positive things, keeping it light. We've always found that we do our best, this is rhythm, when we have a certain lightness. Of course, it's very important for us to perform well. Of course, this means a lot to us, but we know that it doesn't help to be too serious. And so we try to stay aware of that, and we try to hold each other accountable to that. We smile at each other, we say positive things to each other, and we might recognize each other, hey, you know, seems like maybe you're getting a little bit heavy, or just asking yourself, I'm starting to get a little too serious here. Maybe it's time for a little joke. Maybe it's time for me to do something goofy. Check in on how we're doing. And what I mean by that is attitude, not score, at least every jump, and at the start of the day and at the end of the day. So we want to know about how's our energy level, how's our attitude. In the morning, we always start the day with a check-in. How is everybody feeling? You know, and it might be just as much as we're sitting there in a circle, and you know, I come in and I say, guys, I'm really excited for today. I'm ready to go. You know, maybe someone else says, you know, I'm really kind of nervous about this first round, but I'm pumped. Whatever it is, we all have that check-in. That's the beginning of the day. The after every jump, we do the same thing, but that's a bit of a debrief. So we'll say to ourselves, now, nothing technical. It doesn't help for me to evaluate how I did, again, let's say on block 21, after block 21 is done and I'm not going to see it again for this meet. But what might help is questions like, was I over the line? Was I overamped and not seeing enough? Was I under the line? Was I too low energy and not pushing enough? Or was I right there? So after every jump, we get together and we evaluate that among ourselves. And we might say, okay, personally, I felt like that was exactly the energy I needed. Or I might say, you know, on that last jump, I found myself getting debriefy at the end of the dive, and I want to stay focused next time all the way throughout. These are the things that can help in the next dive. Not the technical, but the attitude. And I also say not score, because the score is not always a indicator of that, right? So sometimes you'll have a higher score than you expect with a worse feeling performance, and sometimes the other way. And I think when it comes to the actual competition, what matters more is your attitude, because that's what you can control, and that's what you can use to do better next time, you know? Focus on execution, not outcome. This is sort of a similar thing, right? But the idea that I'm not going to be, when I'm visualizing, when I'm preparing for a jump, it's easy for thoughts to come into my head of, man, it's round 7, you know, we're 5 points ahead and, you know, I really don't want to lose this lead. Or, you know, it's round 10 and we're 2 points behind. We need to make up 2 points in order to win. These things are distractions, I think, from what you do have control over, which is just performing your best. So rather than focusing on outcomes or I need to get 2 more points or I need to get ahead of this team, what I'm focusing on is all the execution things that we talked about, the arousal level, the high level just do itness, you know, the GER. These are the things that are going to give us the best outcome, not focusing on the outcome itself. You know, I don't get an A in my math test by thinking, oh boy, I got to get an A. I sit down, I look at the math question, and I start solving the question, you know? Stick to the important stuff and let the unimportant stuff, which are the distractions, go. So throughout a competition or throughout any performance, leading up to that performance, I'm not talking about the jump itself, but I'm talking about during the day perhaps, or even on the plane or in the mock-up, at the mock-up or in the loading area, there will be distractions. And it's important for the team to have a shared idea and understanding that we're not going to let unimportant things distract us from what is important in our focus. So for example, you go to a nationals competition and they always want you to take your team photo, you know, often before round 1, you know? Yes, I mean, do it, right? It's not that hard. But also, if for whatever reason you can't do it, you know, if somehow you got behind in your other prep and you need to get to the mock-up, you do other things, we're not going to worry about taking the photo. You know, we're going to take the photo after round 2 and everything will be fine, you know? Or another example, I'm in the plane and the pilot calls back and he says, we're going to have to circle for clouds, you know? I don't care. That is not important. Yes, it's important to the pilot, of course, and it's important to safety, but once we're on the plane and the pilot's decided to circle, he's decided to circle. It is what it is. What I need to be focusing on is not whether or not there are clouds out there, but my own performance. And then if the pilot says it's okay to go and whatever your procedure is for deciding whether to go, fine. But I don't let these distractions distract me from my process, which is the visualization, the positive self-talk, right? And I'll give you an example. In Dubai, I don't remember what year, maybe it was 20, I don't know, several years ago, is an international parachute competition, big meet for us. And we're doing well, right? We're sort of in the top 2 or 3. And we get up to altitude and the pilot says, we're going down. It was one of the rare moments when it was sort of too cloudy. So he said, okay, we're going down. And people were saying, what? We're going down. What I was thinking was visualizing a dive. Let's say, for example, let's say it's EMF 21. I'm thinking EMF 21. The plane starts to descend. Then the pilot calls back and he says, well, actually, it looks like the clouds are clearing. We're going to go back up. And I'm thinking to myself, EMF 21, you know? We actually got back to the spot and the pilot said, no, we're going back down. And we started to descend again. And I'm thinking to myself, EMF 21, you know? And then finally he said, nope, we're going back up, but this time what we're going to do is we're going to jump off into it. There's going to be a different landing area. And what you've never jumped there before, but instead of jumping at the palm, which is where all the competition jumps were landing, you're now going to jump at the drop zone, which none of us had done before. So there's a brand new landing area. And of course, there's a certain amount of nerves of like, shoot, I've never landed here before. I'm doing another competition jump. But what am I thinking? EMF 21. Because in this moment, that's the only thing that I really have control over, and it's the only thing that is important to me. Of course, if you're not comfortable with the jump, of course, it's important to recognize that. And you can say, okay, sorry, we're not jumping. I'm not saying not to do that. But I'm saying at the point at which you've decided, I'm going to jump and I'm going to continue with this process as long as the pilot says it's safe. And, you know, let's say if your camera guy is the guy who checks the spot, says it's safe, then that's it. And my sole focus is the dive and the process I've defined. So sticking to the important stuff, letting the unimportant stuff go, and knowing the difference is a really useful thing to keep in mind. And then finally, after the meet, evaluating your performance, right? So it's all done. It's really important to have after action, as in anything you do, right? How were our behaviors? How was our attitude? And of course, how did we do with the score? But that's really last, you know. But maybe how does the score reflected in these behaviors and attitudes? So for sure, what I might do is I might ask myself, you know, it look like compared to the other teams. Well, I don't generally compare myself to the other teams, but I know after the fact that in round 4 we did a lot worse than the teams we were generally in line with. Why was that? Oh, I remember round 4 was later in the day, and I wasn't keeping myself well hydrated and fed. And I believe that maybe I was distracted because of that. And so next meet, I know that, you know, come 2 p.m. in the middle of my day, I need to check in with myself and say, hey, do I need to get a sandwich? Do I need a drink? And that's really important for making my best performance. So using the score, not on its own, but as a way to inform you as to how your behavior, how your attitude, how everything worked throughout the event. So conclusions. Performance skills can be practiced and improved over time. I really don't want anyone to think I'm just not good at this or I'm great at this and that just is what it is. You can get better at performing well. Actual competitions are invaluable. And while you can practice performing in your training, it's never going to 100% replace actual experiences. So make sure you do those, even understanding that competitions can cost more and take more time, but there's no replacement for them. It's important to include performance practice into your training plan as part of your training cycle and as part of your overall training plan. And then as part of your visualization and your own mental prep, you know, and on the other hand, it's important to include the learning portion and the analytical portion, right? So recognize where you lie in the spectrum and maybe make adjustments for that. Am I a very execution-focused person? Well, if so, have I done enough learning an analytical portion of my visualization, and vice versa if I'm a very analytical person? I said it, there's no substitute for the actual competitions. And then the actual performance, develop a process beforehand, define that process, practice that process beforehand, and then trust in that process and execute it at the day of the competition, and then evaluate that process after the fact. I think these are all very practical things you can do that you'll find that besides anything about becoming a better skydiver, besides anything about your flying skill, besides anything about your technique, these things can be just as important for putting extra points on your performance average. Awesome. That is what I have to say. I'm going to stop sharing and take a moment to ask if there are any questions. Can you talk about meets as in when do they happen and where? Okay. When do meets happen and where? There are different types of meets happening all over the world and certainly within the country. There's something called the NSL, or National Skydiving League, and they have local meets across the country. So around where I am in Illinois, it's the Midwest Skydiving League. You can sign up for those. Midwest is basically Illinois, Wisconsin, and then, you know, people from Michigan, from Indiana, from even Iowa, of course, Wisconsin, all come from those areas to compete at our Midwest Skydiving League meets, but then there's also regional meets all across the country. You can find those on the Sky League website, skyleague.com. You can find our Midwest Skydiving League meets on the Rhythm website through the schedule, and also even on our 401 or 101 app. So those are great. and they take no prior experience, especially like I run the Midwest Skydiving League. You can be alone. You may not even have a team, and you can sign up for a meet with me, and I'm going to place you with other people, and you can show up and do that. Jeanette's first year, she had a team. Her team consisted of 4 people. Really, her team consisted of 3 people who showed up for every meet, and they just tried to find somebody to join them as a 4th every competition, and those are super helpful. So there's the Midwest Skydiving League. There's a National Skydiving League that run meets across the country. There's also tunnel meets, like I said. Big ones in the U.S. include the Paraclete Indoor Meet. That's probably the biggest one in the U.S. International ones include Windor in Spain and Bedford in England. There's World Cups. Like I said, I really think that you don't have to be a pro to go to a World Cup, and I really encourage people to consider them. Rarely are all the slots taken for that, and it's an awesome experience. There's also, if you have you don't have to wait for competitions either. Like, you can find another team on your drop zone and decide to do a meet with them, you know, where you just do the same draw on the same day and see how you score against each other. You know, you can take them. This is not obviously the real thing, but you can, in the vein of performing, you can take a meet from the past and decide that today we're doing that meet as if it was happening today and competing against the teams of the past. Yes. Can you talk about the validity of visualization? I've struggled to appreciate its value as I prefer to actually do the visualized thing. Yeah, visualization is so important, and not like even more so for the fact that what we're doing is skydiving, right? Because we have so little time to practice the actual activity. We have to rely on imagining ourselves doing it to help us improve. And there's tons of studies. I'm not what do you call it? Not a professional in sort of sports psychology, but I know that there are studies where they've shown that sort of people, basketball players spending 10 minutes imagining themselves free throwing get a comparable amount in improvement to actually doing the free throwing, you know? It is incredible what you can get out of it. And it works hand in hand with the actual practice. You know, you do more practice, you internalize what it looks and feels like to do what's right, and then you visualize yourself doing what's right and reinforcing that. But man, without visualization, you miss out on a tremendous asset or tool for your own performance. I cannot overstate the importance of visualization. And at the same time, I recognize that for myself, as important as I know it is, I'm challenged with, in my off time, doing that visualization. Sometimes I just get bored. The truth, you know, it's just, I want to do it a lot. I think it's really important, but I can get bored. So what I do is I hold myself accountable by setting goals with a specific amount of time to visualize in my off time. And then I get my 401 app out. I set up a random draw, and then I actually set up a timer, just, you know, a timer app on my phone. And I start the watch, and then I start visualizing the draw. And I'll do what I feel to be 5-10 minutes or so of visualizing. And then I stop visualizing. I see how long I actually did it. And then I record that in my little notebook. I just visualized for 6 minutes just now. And that's how I kind of make the time add up for something that honestly I feel like is a chore, at the same time that I know it's extremely important. Do I literally go through the numbers and letters in my head, ME20, ME20, and so on? Man, that's a good question. And I have to say, you know what? As I've gotten better and better, you know, for the longest time, I said the letters and numbers in my head as I did them, for sure. As I've gotten better and better, I I feel like I'm at my best when I don't even have to say the letters and numbers. But this is something that I've only kind of done over the last couple of years, and I'm not sure if I could have done it without just a tremendous amount of work beforehand. But when I'm in the plane now, preparing for performance, what I actually do is I'm like, I hum a tune in my head, and then I visualize the dive while I'm humming the tune, so I can't say anything to myself. So I pick up some cool psych up song, like maybe something for me, maybe like Led Zeppelin or AC/DC or something, and I'm singing AC/DC in my head, and I'm visualizing the dive. And no, I'm not even saying the letters. I'm certainly not talking myself through anything. I'm just doing a dive and seeing and feeling, what I'm doing. Yeah. Can you talk about sportsmanship between teams during a meet? That's kind of a high-level question, Sean. I don't know if you have something more specific about that. It feels a little bit off scope of what I'm talking about. If you have a more specific question as it applies to performance and stuff, I'm happy to. I guess all I would say is, it is important to recognize that we really don't have any sort of, let's say, effect on other people, right? Or we shouldn't be trying to be doing something to another team. Like Kurt Werner says, 4-way, 8-way, whatever it is, it's all offense, All we can do is do our best. And so I'm very happy to root for other teams to do their best as well. And so know that I'm beating people doing their best and not really be concerned otherwise with what other people are doing, So in that vein, I think, hopefully that sort of demonstrates good sportsmanship, and that I'm certainly not rooting for other people to mess up, or to do anything less than their best. If I can be of help to, other teams, I will. For me personally, I actually get a lot of benefit from escaping the stress of a meet by actually helping other teams during the meet. So if I see another team and they're prepping something, like I might be looking over, and I'm very sensitive to if they've got their process, I don't want to bug them, but I kind of like to kind of have my ear out, my eyes looking, and if they want to say, hey, Steve, hey, would you mind looking at this? I'm happy to. And of course, if not, then I try not to put myself on impose, but in that way, I think that sort of, maybe that's a bit about the sportsmanship as well. Another question. I focus on the mental. What's my physical regimen to get peak performance? Oh, that's a very good question. Yeah, so that's a great question. Physical things. So, like, for one thing, the day of, I can't get stronger. I'm not going to go out and run 10 miles and think all of a sudden I've got better cardio. But for sure, I want to be well rested. So I'm deliberate about, getting good sleep, and getting good sleep in a pattern that I can repeat for the days before. So I really try to make sure I'm trying to go to bed at the same time that I will during the competition. I usually actually sleep pretty well during competition. It's funny, when I'm not in competition, I got a million other things in my head, but when I am in competition, all I've got is that. And so I can kind of like put that aside and sleep better, But so getting good sleep, very important. Making sure that you are both hydrated and have food throughout the day the way you want is very important. And for me, I don't like to change that much. So if I, during my training, have a breakfast cereal for breakfast, and then have like a banana during the day and a whatever, peanut butter and jelly sandwich, then that's kind of what I try to do during the meet as well. I'm not all of a sudden going to get myself, a bunch of hamburgers from McDonald's and, say that, oh, well, I don't have time to make breakfast, so I'm going to do the drive-through. Instead, I try to show up. I'm at wherever I'm staying. Usually I'm traveling somewhere, and I get myself some breakfast cereal, and I get myself the milk, and I get myself the sandwich bread, and I try to do it so it feels, even from a diet standpoint, as much like what I practiced. And then again, I'm reminding myself later in the day. Personally, I get a little more tired. There's all this adrenaline early in the day. I get a little more tired later. So I often allow myself like one Coke. I drink very little soda, but one Coke at like after round 4, maybe, you know. Other physical regimen longer term beforehand, I think being in the best fitness you can be is, of course, this is a sport, and athleticism does matter, and speed and agility, the more you have, and strength, the easier it will be for you. So what do I do? You know, bulk is not important. I'm not trying to max out my bench or, you know, a 8,000 pound clean and jerk. What I'm trying to do is I do personally like a lot of high intensity interval training kind of stuff, a lot of body weight stuff. I augment that, yes, with weights and stuff like that for extra strength. But what I'm looking for is good cardio, because that also helps me to stay positive and good energy throughout a long training day or several days, as well as a long day of competition. And then good strength, speed, agility, all that as well. So personally, what exactly do I do? I do, if you guys know a workout called Insanity, I do Insanity and some P90X, and I like to run. These are the things I do in my off time, my you know, the training besides. Yeah. Neat. Okay. Any other questions? No. Awesome, guys. Well, again, thank you very much for your time. I hope you found this helpful, worthwhile. And I really enjoy this because I think, you know, we spend so much time on the details and the specific flying skills. And those are so important. But to recognize that, I think you can improve definitely by like a full point, maybe 2 points, just in your performance skills. And certainly you can go down by that much. You know, if we take the window of your best performance and your worst performance, there's easily 2 points there, which that alone in skill could be an entire season. You know, so to not focus on something that important, you really would be missing out on a huge opportunity. So yeah, I encourage you to do that. And also, so much of the stuff I talked about was free, and I'm a big fan of, you know, what can you do free to make you better. So this is it.